So once again, big thanks to everybody for being here today. On behalf of Hispanics in Philanthropy, Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Forward Promise Initiative, our wonderful co-funders from New Mexico and Arizona, the Quinalba Health Foundation, the McCune Charitable Foundation, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, and the Arizona Community Foundation. Really, it's an honor and a pleasure to be able to present this work to everybody on the line today, and I hope that it's interesting and valuable for everybody. HIP has recently published a report called Keeping the Promise, which is a counterpart to our 2014 Latino Men and Boys, The Right to Dream report. And what this report addresses is our work in conjunction with the Forward Promise Initiative in New Mexico and Arizona. And we profile the 6 organizations that have touched throughout both states that we worked with. They're fantastic case studies. And what we do is we take the work that's on the ground and through a framework that we described in the initial report, we map the work onto best practices to address issues that affect Latino men and boys and their families and communities. So I hope everybody gets a chance to read it. If you haven't already, there's a lot of really fantastic work that's covered. And the purpose of this webinar is to really give a public audience an idea of the background and the structure that informed this work, as well as giving a space for some of the groups and organizations that we profile to be able to speak to their work directly. So our agenda is pretty rich and straightforward as well. Cynthia Renfro will be starting. Cynthia is a national consultant with Robert Wood Johnson Foundation's Forward Promise Initiative, and she'll be giving a broad overview of the goals and purposes behind National Forward Promise Movement and the way that Hispanics in Philanthropy and our work fit within their broader framework. And then we'll be transitioning to the boots on the ground work with Melynn, Schuyler, and Rosemary Ybarra-Hernandez, who have generously offered their time today to speak to the work that they do and the lives that they affect, and then we'll have a Q&A. So I would like to hand this over to Cynthia to begin her piece. Cynthia, are you there?
I'm right here. Thank you so much, Anne. We really appreciate this opportunity to talk a little bit more, continue the dialogue that we've been in for the last couple of years around men and boys of color, particularly Latino men and boys in the southwestern U.S. The Forward Promise Initiative of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation grew from the knowledge that despite years of significant health investments by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and others, many population subsets, but in particular boys and men of color, continue to experience little to no improvement in health outcomes. In fact, they were more likely to experience chronic exposure to trauma, which affects adolescent brain development significantly. And the Forward Promise Initiative really launched sort of right after Trayvon Martin was shot. And as you may or may not know, the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is the largest philanthropy in the U.S. devoted to health. It launched a culture of health framework in 2014, which was a little bit after Forward Promise got kicked off. But just for definition purposes, what a culture of health means to Robert Wood Johnson and the community that it's working in is that there is a shared value of health in neighborhoods, schools, and workplaces and institutions, which are systems that allow everyone in America to be able to make healthy choices and easy choices about their health. So the Forward Promise Initiative was actually launched in 2012, and it focused on the needs of men and boys of color between the ages of 12 and 19. Over the 3 years of Forward Promise, it became a $15 million initiative with more than 20 grantees, scores of sub-grantees, and a host of philanthropic partners. Now, another thing I want to mention, sort of in terms of what's a little bit unique about the Forward Promise initiative within the whole field of men and boys of color work is that when this dialogue really caught fire after Trayvon Martin, it tended to look really like it was only about like black men and boys. And the Maisha Simmons and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation were very clear that they wanted to make sure that all men and boys of color were represented. And if you look at the different cohorts of the Forward Promise Initiative, they're very clear to make sure that they included Asian American, Latino American, Native American constituent bases in all of this grant making. The Forward Promise does have 4 distinct subgrantee groups. One is innovation grants. There were 10 grants in the innovation group, 6 community partnership grants, 4 catalyst grants, and then a number of field building grants. The innovation grants were aimed at strengthening and expanding existing program models. Community partnership grants were meant to strengthen local collective impact using the collective impact model, looking at those initiatives. Field building grants really focused on strengthening networks, like building the gathering of leaders, convening, increasing other philanthropic support for boys and men of color, policy analysis, and other capacity building and technical assistance. So where the partnership with HIP came in with Forward Promise was around the catalyst grants. This was kind of an innovative mid-course correction to the overall Forward Promise initiative, because while initially vetting proposals through the innovation and community partnership processes, Robert Wood Johnson realized that few organizations from the South, and particularly organizations that work with rural constituents, were not well represented in either of those cohorts. So they decided to approach partnerships with local philanthropic entities to target Latino, Native American, and African American boys in the rural Southeast and Southwest. So the 4 grantees were selected who would get large grants to re-grant in those communities. Those 4 grantees were Hispanics in Philanthropy, First Nations Development Institute, Black Belt Community Foundation, and Foundation for the Mid-South. It was a little over $1.5 million across those 4 grantees that was granted by Robert Wood Johnson, and amongst those 4 Catalyst grantees, they actually managed to leverage an additional $1 million across those 4 entities, and those funds went to 39 subgrantees across the Southeast and Southwest. Catalyst Grants, as it turns out, is the nation's largest single private investment in young men of color in rural communities, and includes the largest targeted investment in Latino and Native American young men in the region to date. So this is one phase of Forward Promise, the first 3-year initiative. There has been planning and thinking and action around next steps. So we're talking about it as Forward Promise 2.0. There's a model that Robert Wood Johnson has developed when they have a successful program that they want to continue to fund and support groups that have been able to do good work with Robert Wood Johnson money, but they want to free up their staff to be able to innovate new approaches. So they spin out these programs into what's called a National Program Office, and that's exactly what Robert Wood Johnson is focusing on now. They've identified candidates for a Forward Promise National Program Office, which will have a renewed set of funds. They expect to announce a planning grant to that National Program Office candidate in July, at the end of July, and then future programs, including the Forward Promise grant making, will be based out of the new Forward Promise National Program Office, which is expected to launch in early 2017. And I will stop there.
Great. Thank you, Cynthia. So moving on, so I hope that context was helpful, just to have a sense of how this whole Southwest Latino Men and Boys initiative took shape kind of from a national perspective. And I just want to mention, again, thanks to our local funding partners. Hispanics in Philanthropy is, we're a nonprofit that works as a network of funders, and what we do and what we do very well is that we serve with groups of grant makers, with communities of grant makers, with collaboratives of grant makers, to support grassroots nonprofits that are Latino-led or Latino-serving organizations. And so this Forward Promise structure really plays to Hispanics and Philanthropy's strengths. We were able to leverage, as Cynthia mentioned, all of the four Catalyst grantees, Hispanics in Philanthropy included, leveraged a significant amount of money on top of what Forward Promise and the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation had initially supported us with, and we're very happy to hear that things are moving forward in a positive direction. So we worked with a collaboration of grant makers to take these funds and this purpose of the grant and work with community-based nonprofits in Arizona and New Mexico that that have really effective and really powerful programs that support Latino men and boys in their communities. And for the rest of this presentation piece of the panel, you'll be hearing from two of the Southwest Latino Men and Boys grantees. So I'll stop there and pass the microphone over to Melynn Schuyler. Melynn, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. So Melynn is the Executive Director of Youthworks in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And Melynn, please take it away.
Thanks, Anne. Thank you, everyone, for joining in this webinar. And I'm hoping to be of some assistance in describing what Youthworks does and also what this source of funding has helped us to expand from a foundational level of service in our community. Our organization has been in existence since 2001 and has focused on just creating opportunities and opening doors. Where that began was with very basic job training and raising dollars to operate our own working crews, to employ young men. And Santa Fe in northern New Mexico is primarily Hispanic, Latino. So we have a 90% male service population that comes through the door out of our total service population, and 90% Hispanic. We do have some Native American population here, and just very few girls attending. So that made us a perfect match for this funding source when it came around, and we were asked to look at what our greatest need would be to assist this population to leverage them further into success in reaching goals and dreams. And what we determined when we looked at the organization as a whole was that our case management programming here was limited, and the greatest need that we could see was the frontline case management team could be expanded, so we had more trained staff ready at the front door when young people walk in seeking assistance, seeking jobs, seeking alternative education pathways, which is our baseline programming at Youthworks. We've developed a wide network of partnerships, government and non-government, local businesses that we work with to place our young people who have come through very basic job training and education and classroom time to move towards full-time permanent employment in our community in any sector that the young person is focused on for their future. So our case managers became critical because, as we all know, young people, boys and men, often arrive in our organizations with multiple obstacles that they're facing, not just being unemployed or not just being undereducated or without having completed a high school degree. They're facing a multitude of issues that are obstacles to maintaining regular classroom attendance, achieving a GED or a high school diploma or any sort of occupational certification that will help lead them to higher wages and higher sustainability for a family and themselves. So addressing those obstacles became more important than attachment to a job or the classroom, because if you don't have your life set in more of a stable situation that you can show up every day, you can depend on yourself and your situation to help you get to your job, to get to your classroom seat, then we're doing a disservice. We're setting you up for failure. So case management became the key to the success of every young person that came through the door. Our young men do much better now. With funds from HIP and Robert Wood Johnson and the collaboration that came through the source, we were able to add a third case manager to our team, which makes 3 very talented, resource-oriented staff available for the 650 to 700 young men that come through the door a year. Our young people sit down immediately when they walk in the door seeking anything and go through just a very quick intake process where we outline goals first. Obviously, instilling hope the moment someone walks in is the key to our success, and then beginning to discuss what are the most difficult obstacles in your life that we can start in collaboration with you. We can start to address while you're job seeking, while you're studying for your GED, to eliminate obstacles so you can maintain more stability as we secure that job for you. We've been very lucky over the 15 years that Youthworks has been in operation in the fact that we have convinced our local government, the City of Santa Fe Economic Development Department, that our work is key to a better community, a better society, and that when our young people, boys and men, are doing better in a community, then the whole community is doing better and thriving. So we've been able to leverage funding through the Department of Labor, but also through our city government for a homegrown, grassroots designed apprenticeship program where we subsidize employers' wages to take young people into their business, to train them into the business for up to 3 months with a subsidy attached, much like the old-fashioned apprenticeship style. And it is a really beautiful way to build mentorship from that employer and build reinforcement for job skills while hands-on work is getting accomplished and learning is getting accomplished. And all of those attachments are held together through our case management team that support that young person through that step into an employer's hands, much like your own parent would do for you. So we behave in the manner that a wraparound program would, and we follow you until we can ensure your success and your attachment at that place. So we're very, very grateful to HIP and Robert Wood Johnson and the collaborative funders for their support and for taking a moment to see that this population was terribly underserved. There's so many of us out in the world doing this work, and it's not getting recognized. And we're just very happy for having been chosen, and are happy to share all of our practices. If any of this is interesting to anybody on the line, we'd be happy to elaborate further outside of this webinar. And that's where I'm going to leave it.
Thank you, Melynn. Thanks very much.
Okay.
I'm going to pass the mic over to Rosemary Ybarra-Hernandez, who is the President and CEO of the Aguila Youth Leadership Institute. Rosemary, are you there?
I'm here.
Great. Okay,
Hello,
you got
everyone.
it.
Hello, everyone, and it is an honor to be here with you all today to talk about Aguila Youth Leadership Institute, and more specifically, Aguila Men of Honor. Aguila Youth Leadership Institute began in 2004, and we graduated our first cohort of students in a college. It's a very holistic college prep program, and by holistic I mean it's not just getting students prepared for college with application process, reviewing financial aid, etc., but is also including opportunities to explore who they are and where they wish to go, and looking to develop their developmental assets, something that we work with Search Institute to provide our students the skills and then also the knowledge and support that they need to be successful. When we began Aguila in 2004, and we really didn't realize where we were headed, and we really wanted to help students to achieve their college dream, whether it was a 2-year or 4-year. Never in our wildest dreams did we realize that last year we would graduate our first doctor, and this year 2 of our law students. In 2006, we developed a program for young women called ALMA, Aguila Latinas Maravilla de Arizona, and when that happened, the young men said, well, what about us? We had more women than young men, but then of course we wanted to address that, and so in 2008 we started the Aguila Men of Honor, and these young men are truly accountable to each other, and they've built a brotherhood. They have core values of education, respect for women, community, civic engagement, spirituality, and leadership. In years prior, my doctoral research focused on juvenile justice policy, and specifically was researching Latino gangs. And what we found in the gangs was this connection, this brotherhood that provided them a sense of self-confidence, belonging, and accountability. So what we did was we flipped that and made it positive. So we do refer to ourselves as a gang for good, the Aguila Men of Honor. They work together, they hold each other, they support each other. And I want to echo what Melynn talked about, and these barriers that these young men experience, which can be are referred to in what is called ACE, the adverse childhood experiences, the different barriers that keep them from moving forward. One of the things that we talk about in Aguila is that Shakespeare said, "You don't know what you don't know." If we do not provide our young men with successful role models that they cannot see themselves in, how do they prosper? How do they achieve a dream? It's just a dream to them then. What we have found is that when we help our young men and they build this sense of brotherhood in Aguila Men of Honor, they return to the nest. They return to us to ensure that those behind them are following their lead. They're involved, they volunteer. In fact, I have two of them online right now in the office because they're preparing for their summer retreat. The summer retreat was something we began with our funding from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and HIP, where that is a weekend experience for our young men to really look deep inside. What is it that motivates and inspires you? What are those challenges that come before you, and how can you work together to lift each other up? And so they return to the nest, and it is important for these young men to see that you can indeed achieve. Recently, we honored one of our young men who was living in Los Angeles and was, as he said, flirting with the gang lifestyle. The family brought him here, and this student, who's also DACA, received some assistance from us. We helped him achieve his engineering degree, and he came back and said, they call me Mrs. H. Mrs. H, you took a young man and turned him into a man and turned him into an engineer. This young man has defied all statistics, and he is just an example of the kind of men that belong to this brotherhood, this gang of good, this Aguila men of honor. And they hold each other accountable, also lift each other and support each other in ways that really do provide those role models for young men. As a result of our work with the funding provided from Robert Wood Johnson and HIP, we expanded our program, and this year we're just absolutely excited about working with 2,000 eighth graders. What was really very shocking to us is that when we went into these classrooms in a neighborhood that has been identified as one of the most impoverished communities in the country, that has, of these 2,000 students, projections of 50% either not going on to high school or completely dropping out. An 80% incarceration rate for young men of color. This is something we could not sleep well with, thinking about these children. Went into the classrooms, and what we witnessed was, as I said, shocking, and that is that in each classroom they were either equal to or majority young men. And where do they go? These are the young men who then go off to prison. We now are in the schools, and we have, because of HIP, because of Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, and we know that violence and youth in prisons is a big health issue. We are developing the Aguila Health Explorers program. We are partnering with universities, medical schools, to provide opportunities for these eighth graders to connect with medical students, doctors, different research assistants, to make sure that their dream can become a reality. Imagine what we can do for a community when their children at 8th grade are actually performing hands-on activities that make their dream come alive. It is possible. It is something that they can do, and it is something they can do with the gang of good. These young men who support and ignite and inspire these little ones to achieve their dreams. We've been interviewing some of these potential students who will go into the Health Scholars Program. And the other day I spoke with a 7th grade young man, Latino young man, who said to me, I really want to get into this program. And I asked him, what is it that you would like to be? What do you want to do? And I thought he would tell me, I want to be a doctor. No, he went into great detail about his desire to conduct research in genetics. what happens is when children do not see themselves in their teachers, in administrators and staff, that dream gets lost along the way. What we know is when we go into the schools and they see these near-peer young men who are currently in college, that they see themselves and say, I can do this. And the parents, we also work with parents. We provide what is called cafecitos. These coffee talks provide information, resources, and most importantly, support to parents that we can truly help their child to achieve that dream. Some of these parents have not achieved even an 8th grade diploma. Some of them are, a lot of them are monolingual. What we go in and do is we provide the village that is needed to lift these children up, because if we don't, so many of them will be lost in the shuffle, fall through the cracks, and we're losing truly intelligent, capable, and promising young leaders. This is Aguila Youth Leadership Institute, where we provide a home for these children, where we provide support 24/7, and where these young men have stepped up to the plate and will not let go and will support these students to achieve their dream. And I welcome any questions, definitely through our granting from HIP and Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. We have been approached by other communities, other cities, other states, even out of the country, to replicate our programming. We surely welcome helping each other, and by that I mean around the globe, to create a better world for our students.
Thank you, Rosemary. So we've already gotten a couple of questions in, and if you have something to ask and you're in a place where you can talk, please raise your hand and we'll unmute you, but I will get started with the first question, which is for Rosemary from Gerardo Ochoa. Question for Rosemary: how large is the staff for the Men of Honor program? How many men do you serve, and what's your budget size?
Would you repeat the question?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, okay. What was the question again?
It's 3 questions in one. How large is the staff for the Men of Honor program? How many men do you serve, and what is your budget size?
We have a staff of 2 for the Men of Honor. Our students come back and assist us. In its entirety, Aguila Youth Leadership Institute has a staff of 5. But 2 of those individuals assist with the Men of Honor, but the majority of the work is done through volunteer. The students come back and guide each other. They conduct sessions. They're involved in volunteer work. They work on curriculum, but it's really based on volunteerism, and they come back and pay it forward. How many men do we serve? We have well over 1,500 students in universities and colleges across the country, and of those, we're probably close to, I would say, 600 students in the Men of Honor, with continual growth in our program. We are having to go into a more sophisticated tracking system, but now we're going into 8th grade, where, as I said, we have equal or more young men that we're going to be working with. In terms of our budget size, the budget of the entire Aguila Youth Leadership Institute is $850,000 a year, and part of that goes to Men of Honor, and $850,000 also represents a lot, almost half in kind. So we run on a very small budget in terms of what we are doing for the community. I hope that answers the question.
I think it does. Thank you, Rosemary. So I encourage people to keep thinking about their questions. Please type them in if you're unable to speak, and if you're able to speak and would like to jump on the mic, please raise your hand and we will unmute you. I have a question as we're waiting for the audience to gather their thoughts. And I'm going to unmute all three panelists just because it's a very general question. I'm wondering what, in your experience, are the two greatest challenges that men and boys of color, particularly Latino men and boys, face, and how do your program models or your work directly address those two things?
This is Melynn from Youthworks. I'm going to attempt to answer the two things. It's hard to narrow it down necessarily. I agree with Rosemary that there's very few adult male role models that our young people can admire and feel propelled to want to achieve, to reach those same heights. So finding local employers, local instructors, retired individuals who've had successful lives that will share their experiences, just be in relationship with our young people to demonstrate that their lives are worth fighting for, that they should invest in themselves because their change, their upcoming change is possible, and it's worth fighting to become what you are dreaming of, no matter what the stakes are. So education and career goals, it's hard for our young people to see those things as valuable because they don't see those things just naturally occurring in their community. There's very few in the generations that have preceded before them that have made those things solid investments and solid goals. So helping our young people realize that those two things combined in whatever form, you can obtain them over time, slowly, step by step, advance you towards a more sustainable, more stable way of being where you can be proud and happy and give back to the world.
Okay. This is Cynthia. One thing I would say, looking at it from the national perspective, is I think a challenge is investment and systemic infrastructure to support the development and leadership and health of Latino men and boys. I know one of the things that was really wonderful about working with HIP was the array of funding partners that HIP was able to rally really quickly. Different than any of the other grants, the number of other funders that came in, and I'm really sad that Dolores Roybal from Con Alma wasn't able to be with us on the call today, because there was such enthusiasm and a spirit of camaraderie among the funding partners with HIP and Con Alma and the others, Arizona Community Foundation, McCune Charitable Foundation, and Kellogg, that really rallied to the community, and then the grantees as well really shared and worked together in ways that you don't always see when working with community-based organizations that are challenged for money. And so I think that just the pure level of investment that's going into these communities, into supporting Latino men and boys is just not enough, and I think that's a significant barrier and challenge.
And I would totally agree with that. We can't just invest once and then go away. We need to continue our investment because certainly there are so many to serve. But getting back to the couple of things that I think are really important in terms of working with young men and Latino males is that, of course, I agree with Melynn, and I'll say it over and over again, is that we definitely need these role models to come forward and to allow these young men to dream, because so many of them don't realize what's out there. It's very, very important. The other thing that I would say is that while it may be a barrier, it doesn't have to be, and that is we have young men of color, Latino males, who have parents who don't understand the system, who don't understand the process, and don't understand that the power of education. It doesn't mean they don't want their child to go to college. They don't understand the process. And when there's no one to talk to, when there's no one to support them, then those children are lost to us. And those families are frustrated because they are helpless and hopeless. In our cafecitos, we are chased in the parking lot after our presentations to please help them. Parents are crying that they need help, because they don't know the process. They're intimidated. They don't know how to approach people in the school systems to advocate for their child. They really need our help. So it is a barrier, however, it is something that we can change, and we witness that change every day. The other thing tied to that in terms of our education system is that we are in desperate need of teachers of color. A child cannot see himself being successful when they don't see themselves in the shoes of others. When we go into schools that are 90% Latino and they're 90% non-Latino teachers or teachers of color in general, when our school systems have to go to the Philippines and complete contracts for 33 teachers to come out here because we have no teachers of color, we have a problem. When we go into classrooms, and I'm not saying this about all teachers, it's not a blanket statement, but we've had way too many experiences where the teachers, either through verbal or body language, are not believing in our children. How do they have the grit? How do they develop that grit that makes them stronger and more confident enough to move forward to follow that dream? Those are barriers that we see, and one of the things that we're developing is ATOP, Aguila Teachers of Promise, where we will take our college students into the classrooms with us so that they can be the near-peer models, but also for them to see the classroom and to see how they are needed and to maybe spark that interest of becoming a teacher.
Thank you to all three of you. We have a question from Robert Medina, which is also for all three panelists. How do you see the role of policy change or policy reform in creating better outcomes for Latino men of color? How does this fit into the framework for Forward Promise?
I would say policy relative to outcomes is an essential piece of how at least Robert Wood Johnson had thought about implementation of Forward Promise. Not significant relation to the whole set of Forward Promise resources, but there was a good chunk of funds that went to CLASP, and that's a specifically policy-oriented advocacy organization that worked on a set of national and some state-level policy objectives around men and boys of color. Off the top of my head, I don't have those handy, and I can provide an email link to Anne that she can post with the recording and the materials from this panel. But I know that policies and structures that currently or historically have made it really hard for men and boys of color to be healthy, to not be traumatized, to not be victimized, to not be present, are definitely ways that Robert Wood Johnson is consistently thinking about how to insert language or create new policies or alter existing policies so that they're more responsive to what the impacts of policies are on the outcomes for men and boys of color. So that's definitely something that's being paid very close attention to. And again, I will link some materials directly related to that for Anne to post with the materials.
This is Anne. I would also add to that so Youthworks and Aguila Youth Leadership Institute were two of the 6 organizations that we partnered with as part of the Southwest Latino Men and Boys Initiative. And their work, both of their programs and projects were much more focused on direct services and outreach, but we did have 2 other organizational partners as part of this work in the Southwest that did look at local policy change. One worked with community health infrastructure and service institutions and education institutions in southern Arizona, really providing cultural competency trainings for a very broad network of health and education professionals that work with Latino men and boys on a regular basis. And the other, so that was Amistades on the Mexico-Arizona border. And then in New Mexico, we worked with the Southwest Organizing Project to take their Student Bill of Rights, which had passed at the state legislature level, and apply within the Albuquerque public schools. So through the school disciplinary handbook to create those policy changes so that fewer students, particularly men and boys of color who we know are disproportionately affected by these more punitive policies, there would be less of a first sort of track into that system. So that I would say is our perspective in terms of our forward promise work on policy.
Mm-hmm. Definitely policies that impact children's lives include those that are health related, and that we need to look at more mental wellness. When we talk about ACE, the adverse childhood experiences, when children come to school and they're dealing with, I call the D's, death, disease, divorce, deportation, these drugs, this is going on in their homes, in their lives, in schools, and when they act out in class, why are they acting out? One of the policies that we need to address is training. And that's coming across the country in emergency mental health training, so that's first-line staff at schools, teachers, counselors understand and recognize symptoms and signs of mental issues, so that we can help these children to achieve mental well-being. Because you cannot study, you cannot focus when you're hungry, when there's divorce, when there's death, when there's deportation. How are you supposed to focus? So that's a huge policy that needs to be implemented everywhere, not just in the educational system, everywhere, especially our police systems where there's disparities in the treatment of particularly young men of color.
So we have time for one or two more questions. So I think this is a question to the entire panel as well. Are you aware of any initiatives in the Northwest, more specifically in Oregon?
No, but I know that there's a lot of work in nearby Washington. Of course, you know, the Gates Foundation out there. But I'm not aware of anything in Oregon.
And I actually live in the region. I'm in Seattle, based in Seattle, and there isn't a lot. There aren't a lot of resources. I would be willing to chat with somebody who has that individual question a little bit offline, and help to identify some places where those resources might be available, but they're not big and they're not very visible at this point.
Great, and so I'll be glad to make that connection after the webinar.
You.
Yes. So we're at 5 minutes to the hour. I think we have time for one more question if anybody has something that they would like to ask or a comment that they'd like to mention. Once again, I want to thank Cynthia, Melynn, and Rosemary for their time and their openness and their candor on this webinar today. And if there are no more questions, then I would just ask if each of them has a closing thought that they would like to share with the group. Starting with Cynthia.
Sure. So I just want to reiterate how encouraging it was to meet the partners initially as Robert Wood Johnson looked at the region and realized there wasn't a lot of proposals in the initial round of funding, the innovation and the community partnership grants, and then we went out searching for partners. It was a hard climb in the Southwest to find organizations that number one could just accept the level of resource that Robert Wood Johnson wanted to move. And you know, it was a little bit of wrangling, and HIP really stepped up and then pulled in other partners and made it happen and got that money into the hands of the people that could really use it. So it was just a very encouraging, exciting collaboration, and really sent the message back up the chain to Robert Wood Johnson that there is something there invested in, and it was definitely worth it to take a second look rather than just brushing off the fact that there's nobody down there that wants our resources.
Thank you, Cynthia. Melynn?
Yeah, my closing thought is to just talk about briefly what is the overarching philosophy of our work in serving Latino men and boys, is that we are very, very careful to look at each individual as a human being, to treat each person with the needs that they are presenting, that we're not assigning to them as what we have prioritized. We believe in the humane treatment of all of our participants, and to meet them at the level that they're ready to receive resources and opportunity, and to never really even assign a label. Some of our young people come through the court systems and post-adjudication and trying to build their life back up into a place of success. And we all believe here on staff that it is extremely valuable not to have people have to keep renaming their path, that we're just all looking towards the future. And so I just recommend perspective to be taken in that forward promise vein, that all of our young people, boys and men, are hopeful. When they present themselves to you, they're hopeful for themselves. They're already investing, and so grab on and help them go forward in that manner.
Thank you, Melynn. Rosemary?
Well, I have to agree with Melynn, is that if we're to move forward and we're wanting to keep the promise, we need to keep the promise for generations to come. You know, someone asked Cesar Chavez what he would have done differently, and he said he would have focused on education, because education is power. But it is not only education in the sense that we know of going to college and getting a degree. That's not the only education we talk about. In Aguila and in the Men of Honor, we talk about truly what Chavez stood for, and that was the education of the mind and the heart. And it is to give back, and is to reach out and to lift others so that we can all create a better world for everyone. And while our young Men of Honor are taking this lead, they're leading for all of us in creating a world where we're all seen as human beings, and that we can live together in peace and harmony, and something like Orlando doesn't ever occur again, and that we can believe that there's promise for a better future for their children. So thank you to all of you. It was wonderful to meet all of the other grantees who we continue to stay connected to, in hopes that we can work again together to ensure the success of all of our young children. Thank you all so very much.
Thanks once again to everybody. And again, on HIP's behalf, I just want to say that we're very excited and heartened by the work, by the cases, by the case studies. After the webinar, I will be sending out a link, I'll be sending out an email with a link to the posted webinar itself, and then the slides attached, as well as contact information. And so I hope that this is something that has been helpful to everybody who's been on the line today. And I hope that we'll be able to continue to work together in collaboration moving forward, in collaboration and in solidarity as well. I hope everybody has a great weekend. And once again, thank you for taking the time to be here today.
Thank you.
Thank you.